Hello and welcome to So Popular. I'm Janet Mock. It's Friday, so that means I'm here to cover all things culture from Selma and Empire to anything else that you can't stop tweeting about. As usual, I have some super smart guests joining me to elevate the conversation and really go in on the topics that matter to you most. But trust me, there will be plenty of fun, and someone may even throw a little bit of shade. Most likely that person will be me. Up first today, the Oscar nominations, and we start with a film that didn't get as much love from the Academy as a lot of people predicted it would, or at least I predicted it would.
Sir?
Who? What king?
There are no words to soothe you, Mr. Lee. There are no words. But I can tell you one thing for certain. God was the first to cry. He was the first to cry for your boy.
Yes, I believe that.
So moving, so powerful. I saw Selma in November at a screening organized by the film's director, Ava DuVernay. I was witnessing history, the first motion picture about Dr. Martin Luther King, helmed by a black woman filmmaker who ensured that black girls and women were not forgotten in our nation's quest for civil rights. During Selma, I giggled with Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley, also known as the Four Little Girls, as they fawned over Coretta Scott's hair. I sat in horror, watching their lives abruptly end in that Birmingham, Alabama church. I snapped my fingers when Coretta Scott confronted her husband about his infidelities, and I cried as John Lewis and his comrades were beaten on Bloody Sunday. Despite my intense emotions, I walked out of that screening a bit taller, knowing that Ava DuVernay existed, that she would be telling the world our stories, that she would offer us mirrors to see ourselves. I was proud each and every time that she and her cast, led by David Oyelowo, were recognized for their work. I, along with many movie lovers, believed Oscar would be calling both DuVernay and Oyelowo's names, but on Thursday morning, my wig was snatched. Selma was conspicuously absent from both the Best Director and Best Actor categories. The film earned 2 nominations, though, no small feat, for Best Original Song and Best Picture. I've read many stories with headlines saying that Selma was snubbed, but snubbed is too passive of a verb for me. Ava DuVernay and David Oyelowo were ignored. They were not considered. They were completely overlooked. Many say Selma was forgotten because of the demographics of Academy voters, which is 94% white and 76% male. Some say Paramount didn't get enough screeners to Academy members, and others blame the negative buzz about the film's portrayal of President Lyndon B. Johnson. Here to help me break down why Selma was forgotten is my panel of experts, who will hopefully calm me down just a little bit, bring it down a notch. Film, TV, and culture writer Ziba Blay, MSNBC's resident film buff, homepage editor Adam Howard, and editor of Vanity Fair's Hollywood section, Katie Rich. Thank you all so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So the awards just got announced, right? Well, the nominations just got announced. We have this huge, I guess, kind of cultural moment where we're, not only are we dealing with, say, Eric Gardner and what's going on in Ferguson, but we're also dealing with erasure of I guess, black artists in a sense. Can we unpack this just a little bit, Ziba?
Ooh, Janet. It's funny because you're saying you need us to calm you down, and even having just watched that clip, that tiny little clip from Selma, I'm already feeling my anger rising, because this is, you mentioned the demographics and the screeners not coming out and the LBJ smear campaign, but at the end of the day, Selma is a significant film in cinematic history in this past year alone. And it's not just like a black thing where like, oh, just give the black woman an Oscar nod because, it'll be historic. It's like, it's merit based. She deserves to be recognized. And so for me, there's no way to unpack it. There's no way to make sense of it, because it feels personal. I want to, roll up on the Academy with like my cousins and them, and like, and fight them, because it's like, what's going on?
She's ready to bust out the Vaseline and just throw some
earrings, So it's hard, and I would love you guys to make sense of it, because I'm still reeling.
Is it as personal for you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think any African American who's watching those nominations sort of gasped, because we all sort of just banked on those two nominations. But then I think with a little time and distance on it, I think it's sort of tragic and sad that we were all counting on one film to sort of represent us at the Oscars. There was a lot of other great work this year by people of all different races, and it would have been nice to see Dear White People acknowledged, or Top 5 acknowledged for screenplay, or something like that. And I think, Spike Lee made a really good point in an interview yesterday with the Daily Beast. It was sort of a crude point, but his point was that nobody's talking about Driving Miss Daisy anymore. 25 years ago, that's the movie that won. And his seminal film, Do the Right Thing, wasn't even nominated. And that film's legacy has lived on for decades and continues to be sort of a landmark film. Citizen Kane didn't win the Oscar. I mean, you could go on. And to me, it sort of reminds me of when, Kanye doesn't win the Grammy and he sort of loses it. I get it. It's sort of an acknowledgement of sort of, let's be real, the white power establishment of the industry, and that's not insignificant. But at the same time, it doesn't make his albums any less great. It doesn't make this film any less important.
But I do think that there is something about the fact that this was the black film that was largely categorized as the Oscar bait, right? It's historic, it's kind of epic, it has all of the different characters, it has this historical context. So Katie, isn't it the kind of film that would normally be nominated in these kind of categories?
I mean, and there's an example last year in 12 Years a Slave, which is another film about African American history that did get Best Picture and did kind of walk away with the Oscars in that way. And for whatever reason, Selma, for a lot of the reasons you were talking about with the screeners and the late screenings, and the film wasn't even finished until after. I mean, I saw it in November and it wasn't quite finished yet. So there's that late roll-up problem that, say, 12 Years a Slave, it opened earlier in the year. And there's some really interesting arguments about really minor, niggling little things that really shouldn't matter, like screeners and when you show things and who's able to go to parties with Academy members. I mean, those are so tiny and are so unimportant compared to what Selma's about and compared to a film's legacy, but really do have an impact on things like this. And you can tell that people saw Selma. It did get that Best Picture nomination. That means that there is a broad level of support in there, but for whatever reason, Ava DuVernay, David Oyelowo, or Carmen Ejogo, or many of the other people in the film couldn't kind of make their way through in their categories. And it's so complicated and it's so hard to know what's actually on the Academy's mind that it's almost more frustrating that we never really will know exactly what happened.
Well, writing in Forbes, film critic Scott Mendelson said, "I am angry both because she deserved a nomination. I am angry because if the legacy of DuVernay's Selma becomes shaped by its Oscar season controversy, I feel that it will affect the artistic opportunities afforded to its African-American female director in a manner different than if Selma would have come under fire under the directorial lens of a white male filmmaker." This is something that we must talk about, right? The fact that a lot of these categories too have largely shut out women. We're not talking about Best Actress, that's already, or Best Supporting Actress, that's supposed to be women in that category.
For
but
now.
Yeah. But in the directorial piece, in the screenwriting piece, in the cinematography piece, what do we think that the impact of this erasure will have? Adam, you did definitely broke down that we don't really talk about Driving Miss Daisy as much. It's just mostly a Twitter meme. But what will this say about not so much the Academy, but in the relevancy of Academy Awards or the Oscars? But what does it say about Ava DuVernay and her career?
Well, I think hopefully it's making her more of a household name. I mean, she's obviously incredibly talented, and I have so much confidence in her talent. I'm sure that after this, she's going to come back with, several other films, greater films. There's a lot of great directors who their work has been over. I mean, Wes Anderson got nominated after years of being sort of a talent and someone that people appreciate. So I think she's going to be
And he
fine.
was originally not really nominated in his earlier films. So is it a sense of being an unrecognized?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Oscars sometimes give people their due once they've been around a little while. But for women, it's a completely different scenario. I mean, she would have been just the 5th woman ever,
to be
let
nominated.
alone the first woman of color. So, yeah.
I don't know, I struggle with this whole, you have to pay your dues, you have to, toil in Hollywood for several years before you get recognized, because, again, for me, I mean, it's weird because the Academy loves a narrative, they love a story, and Ava seemed like such a good story, you know, like this woman who comes from middle of nowhere and on her second feature creates this astounding directorial feat, the historical, you know, significance of what she's done. I think looking forward in terms of the future of her career, of course she's going to make amazing films, I have no doubt about that, but I really do wonder, you know, why does she have to wait 5 years from now before she gets the sort of recognition that seemed so deserved in this moment? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's examples, like 2 years ago, Ben Zeitlin, who made Beasts of the Southern Wild, which was won Sundance in the similar way that Middle of Nowhere did get the Best Director nomination, which is yet another thing that I still can't really explain. You know, there are so many lingering Oscar mysteries, but I do think the idea of kind of making your voice known and being known and just knowing people, you know, the Academy is all filmmakers and producers and actors. Like, if they know you personally, they might be more likely, and Ava's going to know more of those people the longer she works in the industry.
And I myself thought that she felt like the star of the film, right? Like, because they didn't really have any known names beyond Oprah, right? But the person that was pushing, the person I saw in Vogue and New York Magazine and Rolling Stone and everywhere was Ava DuVernay. And of course, people reacted on Twitter, and the hashtag Oscars So White took off. Here's one hashtag Oscars So White. They snubbed Gone Girl because they thought the title was actually black slang.
That's good.
Here's another tweet from comedian Anne Donahue. Oscars So White, they prefaced each nomination with, "I'm not racist, but..."
Well,
did any of you send any Oscars So White tweets?
I didn't, but
I'm surprised you didn't, Ziva.
I mean, but there has to be something to be said for the fact that, like, it's not an exaggeration. Like, 90% of these people are white, and not only are they white, they're male. Not only are they male, they're like over the age of 60.
The Clint Eastwood demographic.
We're gonna talk about that later, because that whole situation.
Ziva's about to go in.
But some people have made that point, that had this film been directed by Clint Eastwood, or if it had been from the perspective of, say, LBJ, probably this film would not have been controversial. It probably would have gotten a slew of nominations. I remember I read an interview with Professor Henry Louis Gates with New York Magazine, and he was talking about how, you know, Hollywood is very old-fashioned in some ways, and they're very traditional, and they are used to narratives of the civil rights movement or the black experience from the perspective of a white person. So even if a great film like Glory, the Civil War picture, is told to a certain extent through Matthew Broderick's character, it's his experience. And I think what makes Selma so unique is it was truly a black movement, a black person story told through the perspective of a black woman, and I think that's something that Hollywood just hasn't encountered before, and they almost don't know what to do with it. That's not an excuse. But
that's something that argues well for its future, though. You know, once people have seen it and they've become used to it, and they get used to a black story told by a black person, which is insane that they're getting used to it, but it's happening. You know, in a year or 2 years, we might be able to look back and consider its legacy. And so many films that have been snubbed by the Oscars or were nominated and didn't win do become. I mean, Citizen Kane, the example you brought up earlier, or in 1999 when the Oscar nominees were really Milquetoast, and then Fight Club, and all these really great pictures came out that year. So legacies really can grow in that way, and I think Selma is really well positioned to do that.
Well, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, a look at the rest of the Oscar nominations. That's next on So Popular.